During a family dinner, my mother was beaming with joy. My father was delivering a toast. My sister was engrossed in her phone. Suddenly, my daughter slipped me a note beneath the table. It read to call 911. She appeared to be quite pale. I remained calm and took action. 17 minutes later, my parents were in a state of panic. That was how my Thursday evening unfolded. I had driven 2 hours to reach this gathering, believing I was fulfilling my roles as a good mother and daughter. The entire affair was meant to be a peaceful night at the family's countryside retreat, a term I used generously for a house that smelled of mold, had low ceilings, thin walls, and creaked at every turn. You know the type. Your niece recalls the bathroom tiles more vividly than your heart remembers the sunsets. In any case, my parents had invited Freya, my daughter, to stay for a couple of weeks right after her graduation. They mentioned she had been looking pale, that she needed some rest, and that they missed her. And I, foolishly, took them at their word. Freya had been subdued since the passing of Henry, my uncle, who was her great-uncle. He had been like a grandfather to her, with no wife or children, just an elderly man with a gentle heart and a quiet home filled with wooden trains. His death devastated her. She wasn't responding to calls frequently, but when I managed to reach her, she always sounded exhausted. Tiredness I could accept, tiredness I could remedy. So, I inquired if I could visit for just one evening. They were not particularly enthusiastic, but they agreed. Now, I must admit something foolish. Upon my arrival, I did not sense anything amiss. I entered the house, and they greeted me with smiles. My mother embraced me warmly. My father made a light-hearted comment about the wine I had brought being surprisingly drinkable this time. Laughter filled the room. My sister waved from the kitchen. They had even lit candles on the porch, as if we were at some highly rated Airbnb. And there was Freya, smiling, albeit somewhat faintly. She appeared thinner and paler than usual. Her eyes bore the swollen, post-crying sheen, yet she smiled upon seeing me. She stood and embraced me, a hug that lasted just long enough to raise my suspicions. The type of embrace that conveys gratitude for your presence without being overt about it. Therefore, I remained silent. I merely grasped her hand and inquired, "Are you all right?" She nodded in response. Dinner commenced. We had burgers, potato salad, and tomato slices that appeared to have been sculpted with a spoon. Everyone conversed as if it were just another ordinary evening. My father recounted a tale about almost colliding with a golf cart. My mother continuously topped off everyone's glasses with boxed wine, declaring just a splash while pouring nearly half a cup. My sister was busy scrolling through her phone beneath the table. The gentleman seated across from me, a family acquaintance, beamed whenever I caught his gaze. I returned his smile, as women are conditioned from an early age to smile when men look their way. I could not recall his name. I did not remember ever being informed of it. Then, just as my father lifted his glass for a toast, something occurred. He spoke about fresh air, family, and how we ought to do this more frequently. I felt a hand graze my knee beneath the table. It was Freya. She was positioned next to me. She discreetly placed something in my lap. A folded note torn from a notepad, similar to the one my mother kept by the landline for grocery lists and subtly aggressive reminders regarding recycling. I glanced down and unfolded it. 2 words, in all capital letters. Call 911. There was no exclamation mark, no emphasis. Just that. I became paralyzed. She continued to gaze ahead, not at me, fixated on the center of the table as if nothing had transpired. Yet, I noticed her hand trembling. I observed her leg bouncing beneath the table. My throat felt parched. My mother turned to me. "Is everything all right, dear?" I folded the note back up without blinking and tucked it under my thigh. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just the potato salad is a bit heavy." They chuckled. My father made a quip about my city stomach. I laughed as well. However, I could no longer feel my hands. What on earth was happening? I glanced at Freya once more. She did not glance back, yet her jaw was clenched and her eyes appeared glassy. Was she being serious? Was it a joke? No, she was not joking. Why couldn't she simply articulate it? Because fear held her back. That was the reason I felt the urgent need to leave. I cleared my throat. Would you mind if I used the restroom? My mother gestured towards the hallway. Certainly, dear. I rose from my seat, taking my bag with me. Just in case. Just in case of what? I was uncertain at that moment. However, an icy sensation had settled in my gut. The hallway was narrow. The bathroom door was stuck halfway, just as it always was. I secured the lock behind me and sat on the closed toilet lid, feeling as though I might be sick. I retrieved my phone. My hand trembled so violently that it took 3 attempts to unlock the screen. I did not call my husband, nor did I text a friend. I went directly to 911. The dispatcher answered in less than 5 seconds. Emergency services. What is your location? I provided the address. My voice faltered midway through the street name. I do not know what is happening, I whispered. My daughter passed me a note beneath the table. It read, "Call 911." She appeared frightened. She is staying here with my parents. I am merely visiting. I am unsure of what is wrong, but I believe she is in danger. Please. The dispatcher inquired about a few details. Name. How many individuals were present in the house? Was anyone injured? I repeated that I did not know. But I suspect she has been. I do not know. I believe she has been attempting to communicate something to me. She seems as though she has been crying for days. Something is amiss. They assured me that help was already en route. I ended the call, remained still, attempted to breathe, and now faced a new dilemma. I had to return to that table, to sit among those individuals who were either completely innocent or potentially something far more sinister. But was I being paranoid? Or had my daughter just conveyed the most horrifying message of her life? And now I was left to wait. I cannot recall unlocking the bathroom door, walking back to the dining table, or how I managed to sit down without losing consciousness. I still recall the glass of wine in my hand, yet I did not consume it. I merely held it as if it were a prop, fearing that if I released it, my hands would betray the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. My daughter had just handed me a note instructing me to call 911, which I did. Help was on the way. However, I found myself seated at a table with 4 individuals who were smiling and passing around salad as if we were not in a slow-motion horror film. It resembled one of those traditional family dinners that begins with a toast and culminates in someone bleeding onto the tablecloth. I chuckled at a joke made by someone, though I could not recall its content. I continued to laugh, nod, and smile. This is the behavior expected of women when they are frightened. It is what daughters do when their parents gaze at them, insisting that nothing is amiss. It is also what mothers do when their child is in peril, yet they remain unaware of the source of that danger. Amidst the forced laughter and the ringing in my ears, my mind reverted to its usual pattern when I am on the brink of distress. It retreated into the past because this situation was not unfamiliar. Not truly. I have spent my entire life returning to this place. The very one we occupy now, which is permeated with the sense of mildew, wood polish, and burnt coffee. My parents acquired it when I was 4 years old, and my sister was scarcely out of diapers. I vividly remember the sunburn I suffered during our first summer here and how my mother chastised me for not applying sunscreen correctly, as if I had failed in my duty to protect my skin. She spoke softly, as she always did. They were not the type of parents to raise their voices. Such behavior would have been too overt. Instead, they were more frigid than that. polite, detached, and almost formal. If you were to inquire, they would assert that they had done everything correctly. We had food, we had clothing. They attended our school performances, applauding and smiling. My mother even prepared our lunches, ensuring no crusts were present, utilizing color-coded containers, and including handwritten notes folded like miniature contracts. Be kind, make wise decisions. Love, Mom. What remained unseen was the silence that enveloped us behind the door upon our return home. The affection that seemed to manifest only when my sister entered the room. The persistent effort I exerted to gain something that was never truly mine. My sister had the freedom to simply be. She could spill juice, cry over cartoons, and break things. They would laugh, call her silly, and fix whatever was broken. I, on the other hand, achieved straight A's, volunteered to do the dishes, and attempted to choreograph an entire dance routine in the living room at the age of 7, all in hopes of capturing their attention. They noticed, but then asked me to cease because I was being too loud. I understand how it may sound. Trivial, immature. Like a jealous tale from a child who felt deprived of affection. However, the reality is this: growing up in such an environment, the lack of love does not manifest as violence. It appears as meticulousness. They executed everything flawlessly, except for feeling anything genuine towards me. At some point, perhaps around 12 or 15, I ceased my efforts. I recall sitting on the porch one evening after a birthday celebration where they forgot the candles, contemplating that perhaps one cannot compel others to love them. Perhaps this is simply the type of parents they are. Once I reconciled with that notion, I ceased to expect warmth and stopped needing it. Sort of. When I became pregnant with Freya at the age of 20, that is a story in itself. However, what is significant here is this: upon her birth, I vowed to myself that she would never experience the feelings I had, that she would never question her worthiness of love, and that she would never have to earn her place in my life. I upheld that promise. My parents, to their credit, showed a vague interest initially. When Freya was an infant, they purchased stuffed animals, occasionally sent cards, and inquired about her well-being. Yet, it did not take long for the familiar pattern to emerge. That same polite indifference. The affection that only surfaced when it served to enhance their image. The babysitting arrangements that ultimately resulted in last-minute cancellations. The texts expressing how busy we had been that followed birthdays. I never discouraged Freya from loving them, nor did I obstruct her in any way. I believed that if they desired a relationship with their granddaughter, I would not intervene. They were not bad individuals, I reassured myself. Merely limited, emotionally immature. However, she was aware. Children always are. There were weekends when we would travel 2 hours to visit. She would bring her backpack filled with art supplies, snacks, and the latest book she wished to share with Grandma. They would nod absent-mindedly and return to reading the newspaper. Thus, I allowed it to continue because they were not causing her harm. They were not doing anything wrong, were they? Yet, the one person who never disappointed her, not once, was Uncle Henry, my mother's elder brother. He never had children, never married, lost the love of his life at barely 30, and never seemed to recover from that loss. He lived a quiet life, managed a successful business, retired early, traveled, contributed to discreet causes, and sent me books with handwritten notes in the margins. Once, he mailed me a pair of gloves I had mentioned liking 2 years prior, with the receipts still folded inside. When Freya was born, something within him appeared to awaken. He held her as if she were something precious. He arrived with picture books in Italian and a carved wooden owl from a place I had never heard of. He never missed a birthday, nor did he forget a school play. He referred to her as his miracle girl, and she reciprocated his affection with every fiber of her being. For the first time in her life, perhaps in mine as well, someone looked at her and made her feel as though she was enough, just as she was. She would often fall asleep on his shoulder, saying he smelled of cinnamon, coffee, and safety. He passed away 3 weeks ago. It was a peaceful end in his sleep, a quiet conclusion, just like the life he led. However, Freya did not take it quietly. She completely shut down, refusing to get out of bed. She would not speak, nor would she eat. I had always believed that grief would manifest in waves, yet for her, it arrived all at once, akin to a blackout. There was no air, no light, no shore. Then came the invitation. My parents reached out, stating that Freya could spend time at the countryside house, the very one we currently occupy. They suggested that the fresh air might be beneficial for her, that family could provide support. And, God help me, I thought there might be some truth to it. Thus, I permitted her to go for 2 weeks. She remained there. I made calls. She occasionally answered. She always sounded fatigued and insisted she was fine. I chose to believe her. Until tonight. Until I noticed the smile that failed to reach her eyes. Until I perceived the silence in her shoulders. Until I held the note in my hand. 2 words. Call 911. The knock arrived 15 minutes after I placed the call. By that time, I had returned to the table, seated on a thin cushion atop a chair that felt as if it were made of needles. My stomach was cramping so intensely that I had convinced myself I was suffering from appendicitis, or perhaps facing divine retribution for trusting individuals who wear cardigans in the summer. When the knock sounded, I froze. Everyone else did as well. My father halted mid-sentence. My mother tilted her head, her wineglass poised halfway to her lips. My sister gazed toward the door, uncertain if it was real. Freya remained motionless, not even blinking. I stood up. "I'll get it," I announced, as if we had not all heard the authoritative sound on the porch. The man, a family friend whom I had not been formally introduced to, made a slight movement, a half-rise, as if unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. I was already in motion. I opened the door to find 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female. They wore no smiles, radios resting on their shoulders, still emitting faint hisses. "Ma'am," the male officer stated. "We received a call from this residence." I replied, I called, my voice too high. I swallowed, "It's my daughter." She gave me a note instructing me to call 911. "She's here. Something is wrong." She won't articulate it, but something is amiss. They nodded, no questions asked, no raised eyebrows, just the efficient motions of practice protocol. The female officer inquired whether she could have a private conversation with Freya. I moved aside and gestured towards her. "She's at the table." The male officer requested to speak with me outside. I followed him, closing the door behind me as if it could contain the anxiety surging within me. Then, I waited. They remained inside for 7 minutes. I know this because I checked my phone precisely 12 times. I was unable to move, paralyzed in place. I simply stood on the porch, observing the shadows of the breeze dance through the wilting roses in the garden. My thoughts drifted to Uncle Henry, the note, my mother's quick smile, and the tea that was always served in the same chipped mug, the one Freya never finished. When the door opened again, I turned to look. Freya stood beside the female officer, her hands trembling and her face as pale as chalk. Yet, she was speaking. At last, she was speaking. The male officer gestured for me to come over. I reached the doorway when I heard it. "Uncle Henry left everything to me," Freya stated. Her voice was not loud, but it was unmistakably clear. "They merely said I needed rest, that I was in mourning." Then they began to pressure me into signing documents. I blinked in confusion. "What sort of documents?" the female officer inquired. "I don't know." "Papers, a release of responsibility." That was their term for it. But it had my name on it. And the lawyer, that man, she indicated. He was meant to be Uncle Henry's lawyer, yet he never contacted me. Only they did. He came here, claiming it was merely to simplify matters. The officer nodded in understanding. Freya continued, her voice breaking. I refused, stating that I did not wish to sign anything. I requested time. I asked for a phone call. However, they confiscated my phone, asserting it was for my mental well-being, insisting that I would be grateful to them later. And then the shocking revelation came. I believe they were administering drugs to me. The room seemed to shift. Even the walls appeared to retreat. The officers exchanged glances. Subsequently, the male officer stepped into the hallway. A few moments later, I heard hushed voices and footsteps. They brought my parents back in, followed by Astrid, and then the lawyer, one after the other. Now, everyone was present in the room again, and no one wore a smile. My mother stood up. "This is absurd," she declared. "She has been grieving," my father interjected, raising his hands as if he were a preacher. "You must understand, we were attempting to assist." "She is paranoid," my sister remarked. "She has not been well since the funeral." The lawyer remained silent. The female officer stated, "We will need to search the property." My mother laughed, a sound reminiscent of glass shattering. "You cannot be serious." "On what basis?" "Her imagination?" "We possess a report and now a statement. We have probable cause." The officers instructed everyone to remain in place. Backup was summoned. I observed everything from the doorway as if I were not involved. It felt as though I was an outsider watching a documentary about a family that had unraveled. They began their search in the kitchen. It took 15 minutes. Upon their return, the officer held a plastic bag. Inside were loose pills, small, round, off-white, without a prescription bottle or label, simply hidden in a kitchen drawer beneath a pile of coupon clippings. The male officer radioed for field testing. They then proceeded to the guest bedroom, which belonged to the lawyer. That was where they discovered the unsigned documents. Freya's name was clearly printed on every page: beneficiary, release of claim, estate forfeiture. All of it was typed, stapled, and neat. Everything was prepared, except for her signature. That section remained blank. Finally, they moved to the basement. I had never been down there before. My parents always claimed it was for storage. It turned out that storage meant a finished room with a bed, a side table, and a stack of folded blankets. It was tidy, almost inviting, if one did not look too closely. However, there was the bolt on the outside of the door and the narrow window that could not be opened. The presence of Freya's belongings, her jacket, a pair of socks, a half-finished notebook, and her necklace, which Uncle Henry gifted her for her 16th birthday, was evident, all arranged neatly on the table as if she were expected to stay. However, one item was absent: her phone. It was discovered upstairs, locked away in a cabinet in the laundry room, alongside her wallet, which had been taken for her peace of mind, as my mother had stated. I did not cry at that moment. I believe I was too stunned to shed tears. The officers did not seek any explanations thereafter, they found no need to. The man, the lawyer, was the first to be escorted out, handcuffed behind his back, his expression inscrutable. My parents followed, with my sister being the last. They did not glance at me, not even once. I remained with Freya, refusing to let her go for even a moment. When the ambulance arrived to assess her vitals, I climbed in after her and sat beside her throughout the ordeal. She appeared so small, curled up in that oversized hoodie, looking utterly exhausted. I gently brushed her hair away from her forehead and softly inquired, "Why didn't you tell me?" She did not open her eyes. "I didn't think you would believe me," she replied. That was the most painful realization, for somewhere along the way, my daughter had absorbed the same lesson I had once learned: when individuals present themselves as calm, polite, and reasonable, the world tends to be too slow to recognize the realities that unfold behind closed doors. Yet this time, someone did. If you have never had to conceal your anxiety behind casual conversation while your daughter reveals a criminal conspiracy at a dinner table, I would not recommend it at all. But do you know what is even worse? When they are released. My parents, my sister, and the lawyer were all granted bail, awaiting trial for what they termed a non-violent offense. No confirmed harm had been done. No previous convictions existed. They were cooperative during their arrest. Right. My daughter had been drugged, isolated, and emotionally manipulated by her own family. Yet, let us treat them as if they merely forgot to return a library book. Freya did not sleep for 3 nights. Every sound startled her. She refused to be alone in a room, even with the lights on. She repeatedly inquired whether we were truly safe at that moment, if they would return, as if this entire situation was merely a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a casserole. I refrained from informing her about the genuine nature of that threat, yet I began securing the doors. Every door, every window, even the bathroom. I am aware of my family, and they do not take defeat lightly. It occurred on a Tuesday. I had ventured into the city for a few hours for a client meeting. Rescheduling was not an option. Freya assured me she was all right. She mentioned she would remain indoors, perhaps read, or finally have something to eat. I nearly decided against going. However, I ultimately did go, and inevitably, they appeared. Upon my return home, I found Freya seated on the living room floor. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her phone resting in her lap, her complexion pale. "They came," she stated. No preamble, no salutation. Just that I was taken aback. "Who?" She did not raise her gaze. "All of them. Grandma, Grandpa, Astrid." I set my bag down and sat next to her. "Are you all right? Did they harm you?" "Did they?" They merely conversed. She unlocked her phone, navigated to her voice memos, and pressed play. I first heard my mother's voice, sweet and syrupy, as if she were complimenting a neighbor's curtains. "Freya, darling, we simply wish to clarify matters. You have always been so sensitive, so poetic. You perceive things differently. That is not a crime, sweetheart." Then my father, with a colder tone. "You do not comprehend the immense pressure we were under. Your grandmother has not slept in weeks." Then Astrid, with a sharp and flat tone. "It was never intended to harm you. It was about fairness. That money. What would you even do with it?" Then my mother again. "It was always destined to fracture this family. Perhaps if Henry had bequeathed it to someone more mature." The recording concluded there. My hand trembled. I reported the visit without delay. The bail conditions were unequivocal, prohibiting contact, and they had appeared uninvited, manipulative, and audacious enough to speak freely while Freya recorded the entire encounter. Even the officer who took my statement appeared irate. That evening, I packed our belongings. We relocated 2 days later. Not indefinitely, merely until the court proceedings. I located a short-term rental in a serene area of the town, a place with substantial walls, numerous locks, and a curious elderly neighbor who lingered by her window as if it were a sacred ritual. Ideal. Freya did not protest. She remained close, still hardly speaking, still verifying that the doors were secured. I submitted a request for a no-contact order. It was approved within 24 hours. The charges were being finalized. The prosecution was constructing a case. Then came the interviews. The police divided them. First my father, then my mother, followed by Astrid, and lastly the lawyer. One by one, they broke down. A classic strategy. Inform each suspect that the others have already confessed. Induce a sense of panic. Observe them capitulate. My sister, who always boasted about her loyalty, was the first to betray, claiming it was our mother's idea, that she merely went along with it. My mother asserted it was the lawyer's suggestion, that she never touched the tea, that Freya was hallucinating the drugging. My father insisted he was unaware of any substances in the drinks, stating he believed the locked room was a secure environment. The lawyer, bless him, completely unraveled emails, payment records, copies of unsigned documents, even a folder containing printed drafts, including one labeled worst-case scenario script. I almost respected the thoroughness. Almost. The charges followed swiftly thereafter. My father faced charges of false imprisonment, coercion, and administering controlled substances without consent. He received a 6-year prison sentence, eligible for parole after 4 years. My mother was found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud and unlawful drugging. She was sentenced to 4 years, with no parole until halfway through. My sister was charged with conspiracy. She received 18 months, serving 9 in actual prison. The lawyer was disbarred and convicted of fraud and aiding and abetting unlawful confinement. He was sentenced to 8 years, with no possibility of early release. It did not feel like an act of revenge. It felt akin to breathing. 3 months later, the estate was resolved. We were summoned to a lawyer's office, a genuine lawyer, one who communicated like a human being and did not smirk at children. He presented Freya with a substantial packet and spoke softly. "It is now yours." The amount in her account exceeded my expectations, as well as hers. Sufficient to cover education, therapy, rent, travel, a life, a future. She wept upon our return home. Not due to the money, but because for the first time in a long while, she felt secure and understood that they could never take anything else from her again. Occasionally, I still ponder whether I was mistaken for not recognizing the signs earlier. Should I have inquired more, pressed harder, trusted my instincts instead of their courteous smiles and neatly arranged napkins? In retrospect, the indicators were evident. Freya's voice becoming softer, her eyes appearing duller, the way she embraced me just a bit too long that evening. I am uncertain. Perhaps I let her down for a time, but when it truly mattered, I listened and I reached out. And perhaps that is what is significant. She is safe now, recovering, and laughing once more. The genuine kind. Not the type you feign at dinner tables to maintain harmony. As for me, I have come to understand that love does not equate to silence, and family does not imply forgiveness without transformation. So, was I in the wrong, or did I do the right thing too late? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely wish to know your perspective. And if you would like to hear more narratives like this, please subscribe.